In the small, sleepy town of Black Hollow, Tennessee, nestled deep in the Smoky Mountains, 1977 was a year no one could forget. Not because of some grand event, but because of a mystery that sank its claws into the town's soul and never let go. Reverend Isaiah Coleman, a fiery, charismatic black preacher with a voice that could shake the heavens, disappeared without a trace. One humid August night, after delivering a sermon that had the congregation trembling with awe, he walked into the dense woods behind his church and vanished. No note, no sign, just gone. For 25 years, his name lingered like a ghost, whispered in barbershops and over kitchen tables, a riddle no one could solve. Until a lone forester, stumbling through the wild, found something that would rip the mystery wide open. It was 2002, and Jacob Tanner, a grizzled forester with a limp from an old logging accident, was mapping a new trail in the heart of Black Hollow's untamed forest. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, the kind of place where secrets could hide forever. Jacob wasn't looking for trouble. He never did. But trouble had a way of finding him. As he hacked through a tangle of briars, his boot caught on something hard, unyielding, buried under a gnarled tree stump. He figured it was just a rock, but when he knelt to clear the dirt, his fingers brushed against something cold, metallic, and unmistakably man-made. A chill ran down his spine. He dug deeper, sweat beading on his brow, and unearthed a rusted tin box, its edges chewed by time. Inside, wrapped in decayed cloth, was a leather-bound journal, its pages brittle, but legible. And on the first page, in bold, unmistakable script, property of Reverend Isaiah Coleman. The town hadn't seen anything like Isaiah since he vanished. He was a man who could make you believe in miracles just by looking at you. His sermons weren't just words. They were fire, conviction, a call to something bigger. People said he'd been touched by God, or maybe something else entirely. He'd been 42 when he disappeared. A widower with no children, his life poured into the tiny clapboard church that stood at the edge of Black Hollow. That night in '77, after preaching about redemption and the shadows that chase us all, he told his congregation he needed to walk with the Lord in the woods. No one thought much of it. Isaiah often wandered alone, praying under the stars. But when dawn broke and he didn't return, worry crept in. By the third day, the town was in a frenzy. Search parties combed the forest. Dogs sniffed every trail. But it was like the earth had swallowed him whole. Jacob, now clutching the journal like it might burn him, felt the weight of those 25 years. He sat on the stump. The forest, unnaturally quiet around him, and opened the book. The pages were filled with Isaiah's tight, meticulous handwriting, sermons, prayers, and then, toward the end, something else. Entries that didn't sound like the preacher everyone knew. They were frantic, disjointed, like a man unraveling. "The woods speak at night," one page read. "They know my name. They call me deeper." Jacob's heart pounded. He flipped further, and the words grew darker. "I see it in my dreams. The hollow. The altar. It's waiting for me." The final entry, dated August 12, 1977, the night he vanished, simply said, "I have to go. God forgive me." Jacob didn't know what to make of it, but he knew this wasn't something to keep to himself. He took the journal to Sheriff Clara Boone, a no-nonsense woman who'd grown up hearing stories of the missing preacher. Clara's office was a cluttered mess of coffee mugs and case files, but when she saw the journal, her eyes sharpened. She read it cover to cover, her face growing paler with each page. "This ain't right," she muttered, slamming it shut. "There's something out there, Jacob, something we missed." She didn't believe in ghosts or curses, but the journal's words clung to her like damp moss. She called in a small team, Jacob, a deputy named Ray, and an old tracker named Eliza who knew the woods better than anyone. They were going back to that stump, and they weren't coming back empty-handed. The forest felt different when they returned. The air was heavier, the shadows sharper. Jacob led them to the stump, now surrounded by a faint, unnatural mist that hadn't been there before. Eliza, her face lined with years of sun and secrets, knelt and pressed her hand to the earth. "This ground's wrong," she said, her voice low. "It's hiding something." They started digging, not with shovels but with careful hands, like they were afraid of what they'd wake. Hours passed, the sun dipping low, casting long, claw-like shadows. Then Ray's fingers hit something solid. Not another box, but bone. Human bone. The discovery sent a shockwave through Black Hollow. The remains were Isaiah's, confirmed by an old dental record from his days in the army. But it wasn't just the bones that unnerved everyone. They were arranged, not scattered. Placed deliberately in a circle, like some kind of ritual, under that ancient stump. And carved into the wood. So faint you'd miss it if you weren't. Looking was a symbol. A spiral with jagged edges like a scream frozen in time. No one in town recognized it, not even Eliza, who'd seen every kind of mark hunters and trappers left in the woods. But it wasn't the symbol that kept Clara up at night. It was the journal's last pages, the ones she hadn't shown anyone else. Isaiah had written about a hollow in the forest, a place where the trees leaned inward, forming a natural cathedral. He'd described voices, not human, but something older, whispering promises of truth, of power, if he'd only step inside. Clara didn't want to believe it. She was a practical woman, raised on logic and grit. But the journal's words gnawed at her, and the way the forest seemed to watch them as they worked didn't help. She decided to find this hollow, if it existed. Jacob and Eliza agreed to go, though Ray, spooked by the bones, stayed behind. The three of them trekked deeper into the woods than most folks ever dared, following vague clues from Isaiah's scrawled maps. Days turned into nights, and the forest grew stranger. Trees twisted into shapes that didn't make sense, shadows moving when they shouldn't. On the fourth day, they found it. A clearing where the trees bent inward, just as Isaiah had written. The air was thick, almost syrupy, and the ground pulsed faintly under their feet. In the center stood a slab of stone, flat and smooth, stained with something dark that wasn't moss. Eliza, who'd never flinched at a bear or a storm, froze. "This is old," she whispered. "Older than the town. Older than us." Jacob, practical to a fault, wanted to touch the stone, but Clara stopped him. She could feel it, something watching, waiting. The journal had mentioned an altar, and this was it. But what had Isaiah found here? What had called him? They searched the clearing, finding more of those spiral symbols carved into the trees, some so old they were nearly swallowed by bark. And then, tucked under a root, Clara found a second journal, smaller, its pages almost dust. It wasn't Isaiah's. The handwriting was older, shakier, dated 1927. It belonged to a woman named Abigail, a healer who'd lived on the edge of Black Hollow and vanished 50 years before Isaiah. Abigail's journal told a story that made Clara's blood run cold. She'd written of the same hollow, the same whispers, the same promises. "It shows you what you want," she'd scrawled, "but it takes what you are." She described visions of a life beyond pain, beyond death, but each one came with a price. Her final entry was a warning. "Don't listen. Don't look. It's not God." Clara's hands trembled as she read. Two people decades apart drawn to this place. Both gone. Both found, but only after the forest was ready to give them up. They left the hollow that night, journals in hand. But the forest didn't let them go so easily. The trail back felt longer, the trees closer, like they were hurting them. Jacob swore he heard footsteps behind them, but when he turned, there was nothing but shadows. Eliza, who'd always trusted her instincts, kept muttering about the ground feeling alive. By the time they reached town, they were shaken, their faces pale as moonlight. Clara locked the journals in her safe, but she couldn't lock away the questions. What was that place? What had Isaiah seen that made him walk to his death? And why had the forest kept his secret for 25 years, only to spit it out now? The town tried to move on. Isaiah's bones were buried properly, with a service in the same church where he'd preached his last sermon. But the mystery didn't die. Folks started avoiding the woods, even the hunters who'd once bragged about knowing every inch. Clara kept the journals hidden, but she read them over and over, searching for answers. The spiral symbol haunted her dreams, and sometimes, late at night, she'd swear she heard whispers. Not words, but a pull. Like the forest was calling her name. One thing was clear. Black Hollow's woods weren't just trees and dirt. Something lived there. Something old and patient. Something that chose when to reveal its secrets. And somewhere, deep in that hollow, it was still waiting. Clara Boone wasn't the kind of woman to let fear take root, but the hollow had planted something in her she couldn't shake. It wasn't just the journals or the spiral symbols carved into the trees. It was the way the forest seemed to know her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that stone slab, its dark stains pulsing like a heartbeat. She told herself it was just exhaustion, that the mystery of Isaiah Coleman's death was messing with her head. But deep down, she knew better. The hollow wasn't done with Black Hollow, and it wasn't done with her. Weeks passed, and the town tried to settle back into its quiet rhythm. The church held a memorial for Isaiah, and folks spoke of him with reverence, like he was a saint who'd slipped into legend. But Clara couldn't let it go. She'd taken to sitting in her office late at night, the journals spread out before her, piecing together fragments of Isaiah's and Abigail's words. Both had written about the hollow as if it were alive, a place that offered answers but demanded something in return. Isaiah's final entry, "God forgive me," kept circling in her mind. What had he done? What had he seen? And why had the forest hidden him for 25 years, only to reveal him to Jacob under that cursed stump? Jacob, for his part, wasn't the same after the discovery. The forester who'd once roamed the woods without a second thought, now flinched at shadows. He'd started drinking more, his hands shaking as he told Clara about dreams where the trees whispered his name. Eliza, the old tracker, had gone even quieter. She'd stopped hunting altogether, spending her days whittling strange shapes into bits of wood, spirals, always spirals. Clara knew they were all marked by what they'd found, but she couldn't stop digging. She had to know what the hollow wanted. One freezing November night, Clara made a decision. She couldn't keep running from it. She had to go back, alone. The journals hinted at something buried deeper in the hollow, something neither Isaiah nor Abigail had fully described. A truth, maybe. Or a trap. She packed a flashlight, a knife, and the 2 journals, leaving a note for her deputy Ray that she'd be back by dawn. She didn't tell him where she was going. No one else needed to carry this weight. The forest was different at night. The air felt thick, like it was pressing against her skin, and the trees seemed to lean closer, their branches clawing at the sky. Clara followed the path she'd memorized from Isaiah's scrawled maps, her boots crunching on frost-covered leaves. The deeper she went, the more the world seemed to blur, like the forest was folding in on itself. By the time she reached the hollow, the stars were gone, swallowed by a canopy that felt alive. The stone slab stood in the center, gleaming faintly in the moonlight, its surface smoother than she remembered. The stains were darker now, almost black, and they seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at them. Clara knelt beside the slab, her breath catching in her throat. The journals had mentioned an offering, but neither had explained what it meant. She ran her fingers along the stone, half expecting it to be warm, but it was ice cold, biting into her skin. Then she saw it. A faint seam, barely visible, running along the edge of the slab. It wasn't just a rock, it was a lid. Her heart pounded as she wedged her knife into the seam, prying with all her strength. The stone groaned, resisting, but finally shifted, revealing a narrow, dark cavity beneath. Inside was a bundle of cloth, brittle with age, wrapped around something heavy. Clara's hands trembled as she unwrapped it, revealing a small, intricately carved box made of wood so dark it seemed to drink the light. The same spiral symbol was etched into its surface, but this one was inlaid with something that glinted like bone. She hesitated, every instinct screaming at her to leave it alone. But she'd come too far. She opened the box. Inside was a single object. A shard of black stone, no bigger than her palm, smooth as glass but impossibly heavy. The moment she touched it, the air changed. The hollow grew silent. Not the quiet of a forest at rest, but the kind of silence that presses against your ears, like the world holding its breath. And then she heard it. A whisper, not from the trees, but from inside her own head. "You want to know," it said, soft and cold. "You want to see." Images flooded her mind. Isaiah standing in this same spot, his face twisted with awe and terror. Abigail, decades earlier, clutching the same stone, her eyes wide with realization. And something else, something older, vast, and formless, watching. From the shadows of the hollow, Clara dropped the stone, gasping, and it hit the ground with a thud that echoed unnaturally. The whispers stopped, but the hollow felt alive now, the trees bending closer, their branches scraping like fingers. She stumbled back, the journals slipping from her hands, pages fluttering into the dirt. She wanted to run, but her legs felt heavy, like the forest was holding her in place. And then she saw it. A figure, just beyond the clearing, half hidden in the mist. It wasn't human, not quite. Too tall, too thin, its edges blurring into the dark. It didn't move. But she felt its gaze, heavy and ancient, pinning her where she stood. "Leave me alone," she shouted, her voice swallowed by the hollow. The figure didn't answer, but the air grew colder, the ground trembling faintly beneath her. She grabbed the journals, leaving the stone where it fell, and ran. The forest seemed to fight her, branches snagging her clothes, roots rising where they hadn't been before. She didn't look back, didn't dare, but she could feel it following, not with footsteps, but with a presence, like a shadow stitched to her heels. By the time she stumbled into town, dawn was breaking, painting the sky a sickly gray. Her clothes were torn, her hands scraped raw, but she was alive. She locked the journals in her safe and burned the note she'd left for Ray. She never spoke of what she'd seen, not to Jacob, not to Eliza, not to anyone. But the hollow had left its mark. She saw the spiral symbol everywhere now, in the grain of her desk, in the cracks of the sidewalk, in the way the clouds twisted at dusk. She knew it wasn't over. The forest had let her go, but it hadn't forgotten her. Black Hollow buried Isaiah's story, just as it had buried him. The church stayed empty most Sundays, and the woods grew wilder, swallowing trails that had once been clear. Clara stayed on as sheriff, but she never went near the forest again. She kept the journals hidden, their pages a warning she couldn't bring herself to destroy. And sometimes, on quiet nights, when the wind carried the scent of pine and secrets, she'd hear a whisper. Not her name, not yet, but a promise that the hollow was still there, waiting for someone else to answer its call.